A Giants podcast for Giants fans
By Giants fans.
It's Shaun Morash.
On the sideline, into the end zone. Touchdown, Giants!
From the offseason to the wins and the losses, it's time to take one Giant step.
All right, welcome into one Giant step. That's right, the luscious pipes you're hearing is that of Shaun Morash. Back with you again. All right, before we get into the news and why I'm here, the Giants hiring a defensive coordinator in Shane Bowen, just kind of further lay out the offseason. My partner in crime, Bryce Gelman, who had picked up steam during our Friday episodes of One Giant Step the entire second half of the year, he will be with you every single week on One Giant Step. So if you subscribe, download, everywhere podcasts are available, free on the Audacy app. Go check out the WFAN YouTube page. You're going to get a lot of Bryce Gelman this offseason, which I think is a great thing. Great young Giant fan in the company. He would not be here without my approval. And frankly, it's a bit of a relief for me, okay? I have been coming with you for 2 full years, every single week, even weeks I was on vacation. And we've kind of carved out a little plan this offseason. When there is Giant news, or we need to preview some serious news, free agency, draft, all that fun stuff that comes with you, I'm going to be with Bryce every single week, who's both going to produce and co-host the show. On what I deem to be off weeks, you're still going to get a podcast, and it's going to come from Bryce. So everybody got it, get it good. And then, of course, in the season, we keep churning them out, and we have a good time. So I appreciate all of our listeners, our followers. I know this wasn't a great Giant year. And frankly, I know it was an easy year as far as if you hopped aboard the podcast, who was co-hosting when. Paul wasn't with us this year. I did a lot of solo, and then Bryce came along. So things have been choppy, but hey, man, full steam ahead. We had a good close to the year, and now Bryce is here to help out throughout the entire offseason. I bring in Bryce now. Hello, young man. As I continue to call you young man. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm good, Shaun. It's a pleasure to have you back. Last week was great, but feels more normal. Feels more like how it's supposed to.
Yeah.
We're co-hosting here.
It feels more if you will. Again, you can follow me at Shaun Morash, at Bryce Gelman. All right, a couple of things we want to get into. Before we get into the defensive coordinator madness, as I kind of dug through what I can dig through here to figure out, to give you really like a take, right? Because let's be real. If you're turning on this podcast, you want some insight into a freaking defensive coordinator. And, I could pretend like I knew every single one of Shane Bowen's calls all I can. But that's not the case. So I'm going to give you what I can, thoughts overall, big picture. But because it is Super Bowl week, we are going to see Giants players, some of which I'm sure speak at Radio Row and make appearances, because that's what all NFL players do at this time.
Bless you.
Sneezing up a storm. All right, Saquon Barkley made the round. Exactly, what a start. Saquon Barkley made the rounds on Monday, including an appearance on First Take, where he reiterated that his goal is to still be, once a Giant, always a Giant, finish his career with the Giants, which was refreshing to hear, because when we last heard Saquon, it sounded like basically, if you're going to tag me already, but it didn't exactly sound positive. I don't know. I don't have the stomach to go through a whole offseason of arguing with people, frankly, about what's right, what's wrong with Saquon Barkley, because it feels like we do this every year. I've been doing it every year with the draft, Bryce. But, man, the way I sit at it is, tell me what we're doing at quarterback. And you can't tell me that, because you can't give away your hand. And there's a million different ways, and this is not the podcast for that as far as what the Giants do. If the Giants really going to run this thing back with like Daniel Jones and insert Jacoby Brissett as their injury replacement and Tommy DeVito's hanging around, I'm sorry, I don't feel the need to pay Saquon Barkley $9, $10, $11, $12, $13 million on a contract this year per year for an extended period of time. If you're telling me I'm going to have a rookie quarterback here that you bring in and you think he's going to play significant minutes, I'm okay with Saquon Barkley making decent money, not Christian McCaffrey money, for 2-3 years. And I think, and I hope that that's kind of the way Joe Shane, approaches using this chess piece here, Bryce.
I agree with that. I mean, something I said last week is that, yes, we understand what Saquon brings to this team. We understand what he has been for the Giants since he was drafted in 2018. But a part of me wants to see what the Giants can do without it. Like being able to find a solid option that isn't Matt Breida, who can back him up if they want to bring him back. Or if they don't bring him back, they actually draft a running back who could fill his shoes somewhat. Obviously not going to be anything like he was in 2018, drafting him second overall. But the Giants need to learn how to live without Saquon Barkley. Like, it's enough. I feel like, we talked about it 100 times in this podcast. It's unfortunate that the running back market is the way that it is right now. I think all Giants fans can appreciate Saquon for being as upstanding of a Giant and as upstanding of a member of the community as he has been even right now. It's a tough situation, and he hasn't gone behind the team's back. He hasn't talked to the media. Like, he has kept it sane. He has kept it respectful. Even now, like, we know nothing right now. We know just what he said, and what he said is the fact that him and Joe Shane and his representatives are going to speak at the combine. It doesn't sound too promising, but he is sitting here continuing to say that he wants to be a Giant for life. Like, what do we do to deserve this guy? He's a great guy. Injuries aside, the amount of games that he's missed aside, he has been a great member of the New York Giants. And I wish him luck. If the Giants do decide to move on, I'd like to see him back. But there is a part of me still that would like to see the Giants learn how to live without him, learn how to thrive with a younger running back, do what every other team does. Look at all the teams that have won recently. Yeah. They've done it with guys that are young, that weren't drafted really high up in the draft 5-6 years ago. It's enough. It's enough at this point, Shaun.
I completely agree. And look, that's kind of like the pain of Eric Gray getting hurt this year. What is he? But I still think you can put together a tandem. And again, when everybody panicked, and I'm not trying to say that next year's a Super Bowl team, when Tiki Barber retired after 2006, they had Brandon Jacobs in a 7th rounder named Ahmad Bradshaw. They figured it out. I'm sorry, run games are there. All right, but the real reason we're here and we're doing this pod, breaking news on Monday, came down late Monday. The Giants have finally hired a defensive coordinator. This after the Jordan Renan report that the Giants, top 2 choices were gone. They hire Shane Bowen from the Tennessee Titans. All right. My initial gut reaction before I bounce everything off Bryce and get his reaction. The Giants were basically down to making a decision. Either they were going to hire Shane Bowen, who was formerly with Tennessee, worked underneath Mike Vrabel for the last 3 years as a play caller on the defensive side. He was the only candidate left that had actual defensive coordinator experience and called plays. Otherwise, they would have been elevating somebody, whether it was the linebackers coach in Kansas City, Jerome Henderson here in New York, somebody from a positional grouping with no experience. I don't think that necessarily experience versus no experience would have been how I determined who got the job, but just strictly sitting back here and viewing it, I think the team needs less questions and more answers. So if that means an offensive-minded head coach who's already bringing back Mike Kafka can hand the keys over to somebody who has for 3 years called plays, I guess that makes me feel better. Now, as far as what actually Shane Bowen brings to the table, I'm going to give Nick Filato a lot of credit here, him of Big Blue Banter. He does a great job. It's another podcast I listen to plenty. He went through a lot of these metrics. Basically, it's apples and oranges to compare what the Giants' personnel is to what the Titans are in terms of players. I actually think the cupboard's a little more deep here with the Giants and what they built up under Wink Martindale the last couple of years than what the Titans have had. But it is still a guy who runs a 3-4 defense. The Titans last year, and what was not a great defense, ranked first in touchdown red zone touchdowns. Yeah. So they were very good at holding teams to field goals or failing, which I think is great. They saw increases in their EPA per play. They were middle of the pack in points per game, yards per game. So clearly Shane Bowen wasn't running a crap defense. The one big takeaway, and I'm seeing Titan fans come in, you can see all this. They are not a team, the Titans were not a team that blitzed a ton. And, that could have to do with not trusting corners and safeties on the back end. But where Wink Martindale would dial up so many specific blitz packages, we saw Jason Pinnock coming in a ton, stuff like that. Maybe the Giants now are going to blitz significantly less. The Titans love to get after it with their front four. Well, guess what? The Giants are going to have to add another edge rusher if you don't trust Azeez Ojulari. Why should you stay healthy? But there should still be a defense where Kayvon Thibodeau eats. And frankly, Jeffrey Simmons was a beast in the middle. A defense where Dexter Lawrence eats. So I guess my main takeaway would be this feels like more of a safe hire than anything. It feels like a hire where I'm not necessarily panicked that the defense is going to go take an enormous step back. But I'd be lying if I told you, oh my God, this looks like an unbelievable home run hiring. It's going to be wait and see. But nonetheless, he's still a 37-year-old coach, not some kind of old grizzled guy who feels like he could butt heads with Brian Dable. And frankly, at this time, it looks like he's going to talk to a couple of the Titans assistants that worked underneath him. And is a great guy to learn underneath, like he did with Mike Vrabel, defensive-minded head coach. So overall, Bryce, look, I can't sit here, put my balls on the floor and tell you, what an unbelievable hire. But on first glance, I'm not upset today as a Giant fan. And frankly, I'm glad that they got this over with.
It's just like, are you concerned at all with how this went down? Were there two options not deciding to come to the Giants? And there was, there were reports earlier today that the Giants couldn't make a decision because their top two guys were afraid to join a team that had high expectations coming off a down year last year. They didn't want to look so negatively as a defensive coordinator. You could say that, or you could look at it from, the Pat Leonard perspective and the fact that Brian Dable's a problem and the defensive coordinators don't want to be stepped on. They don't want their toes stepped on by this lunatic head coach. So, I mean, listen, they got their third guy or fourth guy, whatever you want to say, and it's someone with experience. And I think at the end of the day, you could look at what the Titans did in terms of red zone defense. You could look at how they were middle of the pack, top 5 run defense the last 3 years with Bowen as defensive coordinator. Giants
run, man.
Giants were awful run defense. They allowed the most rushing touchdowns last year, and they ranked bottom 3 in yards per rush. Something that the Giants, blitz heavy defense, like you allow the big play. But it's something that. What you want to say something?
No, I was just gonna say, like, I'm with you on the run defense, but you mentioned the word right off the bat when you saw that little rant. Like, are you concerned? Here's why I'm not concerned. Because I'm not. Overall, my biggest, fear, if you were to tell me off air, but we're on air, we'll talk about it. Shaun, what's your fear with Wink Martindale leaving? That Dexter Lawrence had his 2 best years under Wink Martindale. We just paid him a boatload of money. He's the absolute best player on the team. But do you hire somebody where just for whatever reason they're changing the technique, everything, whatever with Dexter Lawrence? And I look at Jeffrey Simmons, and to that point, you bring up the run stuff. I think Dexter Lawrence can only even get better as a run stuffer. Yeah. So I'm not. I also think that when you look at the names the Titans had in the secondary, before they got rid of Byard at safety, it was kind of slim pickings. And I know the Giants are going to add another corner here, but I'm excited about the potential of Deontay Banks, and I'm really interested to see what Cordell Flott, is he going to be a boom or bust kind of player here? So I don't think my concern's there, man. I really not. Now, I would be really concerned if Kayvon Thibodeau's constantly dropping back into coverage as a result of this or something like that. I hope he continues to be beast as a pass rusher. But put it this way. This could fail miserably, or it could be great. But what's a bigger concern? A non-defensive-minded head coach giving the reins to somebody who's never called plays before on defense when you just essentially had a defensive head coach. So that's why, even if 9 things go wrong, you've crossed off a 10th thing that ultimately my head coach shouldn't have to worry about this right now, Bryce.
It's good that you mentioned that, because I wanted to bring up the fact that this can easily be a seamless transition. To go from, as you said, a guy who called the plays on defense, a guy who, and Wink Martindale is this huge figurehead, especially on the team. And the Giants, Wink Martindale, he's one of the main guys as the defensive coordinator. But you bring in another defensive coordinator, a guy with actual experience. The other candidates didn't have as much experience. Right. So I think, listen, this is, again, it's unfortunate that it had to be the Giants' 3rd, 4th choice, but it is a guy with experience. It's a guy who can come in, who has led a really solid defense over the last 3 years. In areas the Giants have been awful in. So
you could argue he's made a lot of not having much there. You know what I mean? Not that the Titans have no players. Howard Landry's a good player. Jeffrey Simmons is a good player. But it's not like you looked at the Titans and they had some loaded defense. So the fact that he hadn't been a complete disaster, overall, again, nothing I think at this point was going to necessarily excite me. But I'm definitely relieved that it's over, and I'm totally okay and on board with this hire. And now, of course, it's going to come the next step, which is how much influence Bowen will have with Shane and Dable as far as what he's looking for, the type of players he's had, tough, dependable, all that stuff that Dable sells you on. Well, I hope Bowen aligns with that, and I hope that, they are amendable to Bowen breaking a tie if they're coming down to 2 pass rushers in the second round, what guy he actually wants to fit his defense, because they were doing that with Wink. It's part of the reason Deontay Banks is here. So, I mean, that whole part of it, I just find to be interesting, Bryce. So, from there, look, big box checked off for the Giants here. They get the defensive coordinator, and now basically they just had everything happen at the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine game. We kind of just, tail between the legs the next couple of weeks. We head towards the Combine. I hope after the Super Bowl in the next 2 weeks, the best possible outcome of a podcast Bryce Gelman and Shaun Morash could be doing on One Giant Step is we find out the Giants have traded for the number 1 overall pick. I still have a pipe dream that can happen. I'm still praying for it. I still hope that's
drop that bomb at the end of this podcast, and we're not just going to address it.
Well, that's my hope. That's my hope, because I sit here and I look at the Commanders hiring Dan Quinn. I look at the Patriots hiring Gerard Mayo, 2 defensive-minded guys you would think aren't really brought in to develop quarterbacks. And my hope is that one of those 2 teams maybe goes like the Russell Wilson route. If the Bears do want to keep the pick, go the Justin Fields route. If not, if the Bears are going to keep Justin Fields, or we don't know where they stand on this, I hope that it's the Giants, not the Vikings, and somebody like that goes with the all-in chess move to make that happen. I pray it happens. I got to look at the date last year. If the Bears-Panthers deal happens, but I hope that is when we are going to do our podcast here, Bryce.
That's the one thing I'll say, and then we'll wrap up here. But do you think the Giants can afford to give up the assets needed to trade up for Caleb?
Yep.
You think that they don't have enough holes to fill?
Bryce, you know what? I'm going to make a little do work. You bleep this out. I'm so tired of that being the excuse, okay? Because I've argued with Tiki about this plenty. If he's listening to this, he's going to be laughing. I'm so tired about this being an argument. You know what's a big hole? A quarterback that has 2 neck injuries in 3 years. The Texans had a crap ton of holes, and they got the right quarterback in C.J. Stroud. Suddenly those holes are minimized. Trade up. It's not like you're trading all 7 rounds worth of picks. Yeah, okay, you give up a first rounder next year. Ultimately, if you hit the quarterback, it blocks a lot of holes. The Giants traded a ton to move up 3 spots, essentially, and one ended up being a swap to get Eli Manning. Is anybody complaining about those picks years later? Stop worrying about the misses when you give up holes. Go get your guy and identify your guy. I'm not worried.
If they do that, they go trade up for a guy who turns out to be one of the biggest busts in Giants history, then you will not hear the end of it. And also, why are you bringing in a guy? Shaun, why are you bringing in a guy to play behind a god-awful offensive line? Like that's the thing. Are you really going to go out of your way?
Yeah, Bryce.
Guess what? After quarterback,
Guess what? You busted on offensive linemen how many times in the first round? And you know what? I'm tired. The offensive line they're going to pick. They're going to sign somebody in free agency, play tackle, whatever it is. They drafted a center in the second round last year. They still spent the top 100 pick on Josh Azudu, who's coming back. You hope you develop into one guard. You have one of the best left tackles. I know the offensive line wasn't great this year. It was featured a lot of injuries. The offensive line also isn't as ass backwards as everybody thinks in comparison to the league. It stabilized throughout the rest of the year when Tyree Phillips got hurt, but when he played a little right tackle, you don't need an elite offensive line. You need an average offensive line. And the Giants are a lot closer to an average offensive line than I think a lot of people care to admit. The Andrew Thomas injury ruined them, and you need John Michael Schmitz to take the next step. That being said, at the time of taping this, I'm going to tip my cap to you, sir. I'm going to watch True Detective and eat some turkey chili on the couch.
Enjoy, Shaun. Enjoy.
All right. You can follow at Bryce Gelman, at Shaun Morash. Keep downloading and subscribing to this podcast. We appreciate all of you. Chef's Kiss. Free on the Audacy app. Enjoy the Super Bowl. And thanks for taking One Giant Step with us.